Russiagate and WikiLeaks, Julian Assange. I'm Randy Credico. And we have a few more speakers that will be here a few minutes late. Max Blumenthal came all the way up from DC, as did Ray, and Dennis Bernstein came all the way from the Bay Area. So you have a very special panel. I'm not going to do as much talking as I normally do. I have a comedy show at 3:30, so if you wanted to see me talk then about Russiagate, I'll be happy to try to do comedy. And this, I haven't done a comedy show in like a year now. I've lost my sense of humor, I think. Well, I'm peripherally involved in this whole Russiagate, and that's the reason why they asked me to put one together. I normally just do a comedy show. So with that said, I'd like to begin. If Mark Crispin Miller comes in, have him sit right up here. Okay? I'd like to begin with Dennis Bernstein, who worked with me on. I lost my job at WBAI, a former radio station in New York City. Dennis brought me in as a refugee, basically, and we continued the Assange series. We did 20 shows together, all together, maybe 22 now. And if you want to get that 22 piece set, the Assange Countdown to Freedom, I would say get it from KPFA, because there are people over the last year who have ordered it all over the world, and they still haven't received it going through WBAI. So I would say you call up KPFA, they always get it out on time. Because they always complain to me that they don't get it. In fact, I was at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and two writers from the Daily Beast said, we ordered that, and we still haven't got it in 5 months. All right, so now Dennis, one of our guests, regular guests on the Assange series has been the great John Pilger, and Dennis is going to open up with a statement that John Pilger wrote for this particular event.
Just over here?
Yeah, if you want to, you feel better standing up.
No, I can. I'm good. Thank you, Randy. Good to see everybody here. Good morning. Nice to see you.
Good morning. Yes, good morning.
Afternoon.
Thank you for coming.
I think we just transitioned. Before I read this, Randy doesn't want this to be a funeral show, but before I read this, I'm going to quote what I did quote on our collective show doing interviews in terms of the plight of Julian Assange, and that was a quote from a sort of an itinerant, illiterate carpenter from Italy who fled Mussolini to end up with the Nazis in Argentina. But he used to say these amazing things, and one of the things that he said was, truth has very few friends. Those few are suicides. And I think about the people who I've seen tell the truth and be persecuted or executed for telling the truth. John Pilger, anybody here doesn't know who John Pilger is, don't raise your hand. This is from John Pilger coming from Australia. He couldn't make it. He wishes he could be here, but this is what he wanted to say about his friend Julian Assange.
Can you come in and let the door close, please?
I'd like to.
There is a silence among many who call themselves left. The silence is Julian Assange. As every false accusation has fallen away, every bogus smear shown to be the work of political enemies, Julian stands vindicated as one who has exposed a system that threatens humanity. The collateral damage video, the war logs of Afghanistan and Iraq, the Cablegate revelations, the Venezuela revelations, the Podesta email revelations. These are just a few of the storms of raw truth that have blown through the capitals of rapacious power. The fakery of Russiagate, the collusion of a corrupt media, and the shame of a legal system that pursues truth-tellers have not been able to hold back the raw truth of WikiLeaks revelations. They have not won, not yet, and they have not destroyed the man Only the silence of good people will allow them to win. Julian Assange has never been more isolated. He needs your support and your voice. Now more than ever is the time to demand justice and free speech for Julian. And that's a big thank you from John Pilger, and thank you all.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Dennis. All right. I am a friend of Assange. I've been in the embassy 3 times. I reported for Dennis in London. The last time I saw him was in November 7th. And I got to tell you, he is such a brilliant individual. And he is in a room about 1/3 this size. That's it. And he's been there without sunlight. And he continues to pump out stuff until last month. They shut him off. I think like 60 days now he's been shut off since March 27th. But I know that he listened to the show all the time, always gave me, when Dennis and I were doing the shows together, recommendations for music, you know, and things like that. Really, he was actively involved in it. And he did the show three times altogether. Now, one of his favorite guests was one of the guests 2 or 3 times, and that is Ray McGovern. And Ray McGovern, also, since I'm dedicating this show to Robert Knight, the great Robert Knight, he was a friend of Ray and Dennis. I get choked up. So I'm turning it to you.
To me?
Yes.
Okay.
Nice round of applause for Ray McGovern.
Yes. This working?
Yeah, it's just remote the camera.
Yeah, it's not for sound. It's only.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I have no mic. I just speak
No,
up.
no,
All
you're
right,
not.
good.
Stentorian voice.
All right. Well, I was telling Randy before that I'm conflicted because he's been subpoenaed so many times that I have subpoena envy. All they do is beat me up. They never subpoena me. I don't know.
Bring the Fifth Amendment with you when you go down.
I'd like to just focus on one aspect of the WikiLeaks business and Julian Assange, who I'm proud to call a friend. I've been in the embassy a handful of times. Last time was 4 days before the November election in 2016. He was completely washed out, but you could sense a feeling of accomplishment. He had done everything he could to make sure that he got raw information out that was truthful information, which is what he trades on, okay? And John Pilger had been given the mission to shop around an interview that they had done earlier that day. It must have been like November 4th or 5th, I guess. And John couldn't sell it. He couldn't give it. BBC wouldn't take it. Nobody wanted it. And so RT, of course, took it. That was the least favorable option just because of you know what. But Julie was feeling really good. We had a beer. We didn't spend a lot of time together. He told me that he was going to be washed out. And I don't think he or anybody else that had their head screwed on right really expected what happened a few days later when Hillary won. I was in Germany at that time. You should have seen the German anchors trying to cope with the returns that came in Germany about 3, 4, 5 in the morning. So what I'd like to do is go back to the notion of Russiagate, which starts with
None of that.
With Vladimir Putin, right? He's sitting around and he's watching the campaign 2016. And he's got his associates around. He says, "Wow, this Trump guy, he's unpredictable." And he brags about being unpredictable. And he lashes out at the slightest offense or slight. "Oh man, this is going to be really fun. This is just the guy I want across the ocean with his fingers on the nuclear codes. So do everything you can. Please help him win, because this is going to be really fun." Give me a break. That's the major premise, guys. That's the major premise. That makes no sense. I've been watching Soviet and Russian leaders for 55 years, ever since I left this wonderful, beautiful town, okay? And what they expect, what they want, what they ideally hope for is predictability. Even Hillary was more predictable. Not that she would have been any better. But so the whole premise falls if you look at it. The other thing, of course, is that Hillary was a shoo-in. She was going to win. I mean, almost everybody thought she was going to win. So what percentage is there in the head of Russia saying, you know, she's going to win, but, you know, let's just for fun, let's hack into the DNC and see what we can find, you know, and this is going to be good, it'll be fun, and then she'll be even more angry with me, and we'll have to live with that, but yeah, that's going to be fun. That doesn't make any sense either. Now, we know from the two of our veteran intelligence professionals for sanity folks who were former technical directors at the National Security Agency, okay, that everything is collected. And they couldn't really say that until Snowden came out and said, everything's collected, and here are the, we used to call them view graphs, here are the slides, okay? And it shows exactly how they are connected, how they are collected. So the business about NSA not being able to find the hack, the Russian hack. Yeah, thanks for laughing. Down in Washington, nobody laughs. They can't find it, they can't find it. Keep looking, Bob Mueller, keep looking. Okay, they can't find it because it's not there, folks. If it were there, they would have it. NSA has everything. NSA has all Hillary's emails, even the ones that she chopped up and tried to destroy. They have everything. So that's one major thing. And the other consideration to remember in all this, and explains why the deep state felt that they could play fast and loose with the law and the Constitution, is because Hillary was gonna win. All right. Now nothing is explainable unless you accept that they felt, no, look, we can do insurance policies, we can take real liberties with what the Department of Justice or what the FBI usually does, and you know, Hillary's going to win, so instead of being put in jail, we're going to get a special commendation award. That's what they thought. Now, Obama was a tool of John Brennan. John Brennan was head of the CIA for Obama's second term, and he was his national security advisor for counterterrorism during the first term. There's lots of evidence to that. I won't go into it. Maybe just to say that when the torture report was completed by the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Obama tried everything he could, every trick in the trade, to prevent it from being published until the new chairman came in, Richard Burr from North Carolina, who the first thing he did, anybody remember? First thing he did was say, now I'm the chair of this committee now, and I recall all the copies of that torture report, all 7,000 pages, and I want them back now, and I want them back now. Okay, now there are, I think, five petitions out there. And Gina Haspel, I have in my mind's eye, she was right at the Senate committee, giving her copy right back. So there's supposed to be a copy extant in the Obama files. If they say, Obama, you had a deep six that, he would. He will. So that's a biggie. It's important to know that Obama was a tool of the deep state. He was scared of it. Now, Obama himself was careful because he's a lawyer, right? So on the 18th of January, when he was just about to leave, 2 days away, he made a statement which says, you know, I have to tell you, this is a press briefing. The Russian hack, he didn't go like this, the Russian hack, we don't know how it got to WikiLeaks. I mean, the conclusions of the intelligence community on that are inconclusive. His words. Oh, now isn't that neat? So they know about this hack, but they don't have any evidence. And they admit that they don't know how it got to WikiLeaks. And of course, Julian and Craig Murray have both said it was not a hack, it was a leak. And I won't go into the play-by-play on how these two technical directors from NSA have proven from forensic studies that the whole thing is a hoax, that one of the events, one of the intrusions so-called Guccifer 2.0. You know what Guccifer 2.0 is a pseudonym for? John Brennan. Remember where you heard it first. It's going to come out, okay? Let me tell you how we pieced that all together. On June 12th, 2016, Julian Assange announced, I have emails relating to Hillary Clinton and they're just about to be published. Whoa, June 12th. June 14th, CrowdStrike, a very dubious entity doing technical work for the DNC and Hillary, has said, we have found corruption. And there are signs that there are Russian intrusions here. That's the 14th. On the 15th, Guccifer 2 arises out of the ashes and says, yeah, we did it, and we're working for WikiLeaks. Now give me a break. That was never proven. And the metadata that we got on another leak that was highly advertised as a Russian leak just doesn't pan out. There's no evidence to that at all. So we're going to dismiss that. We can talk about that later if you have questions. But what I'd like to move to, the major event here, is March of 2017, and it's called Vault 7. Anybody heard of Vault 7? Yeah. Whoa, that's good. Nobody down in Washington has. Did you read about it in the New York? Did you read about it in the New York Times?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, on March 7th, Julian Assange made an announcement, and he said a CIA source, we think it was a contractor that had a conscience, okay, was looking at the cyber offensive tools developed by CIA with the help of NSA and was aghast. And he gave us a treasure trove of information that rivals what Ed Snowden brought out into Hong Kong in how big it is and how important it is. Whoa, that's big, all right? So what happened? Well, the Times did notice on March 7th that one of these tools allows somebody to take control of your car, your computerized car, and make it go 100 miles an hour, okay, and kill you, okay. Oh, that was neat. Did that ever happen? Anybody?
Yes.
When did it happen?
Hastings.
Hastings. You know, you don't have to be conspiracy theorists to see how these tools work, right? Now, by the way, conspiracy theorists, that's what Alan Dulles used. When people said, wait a second, we think the CIA may have been involved in JFK's assassination, he said, conspiracy theorists, conspiracy theorists, conspiracy theorists, and he succeeded in branding everyone, and we all know now, at least I know, to my satisfaction, that the CIA was deeply involved in the assassination. So conspiracy theorists has been around since then. Do not blanch before it. So what happened? Well, on the 7th, the Times did hold a little story, and then there was another story, talked about a, not a Sanyo, but what's a South Korean?
Samsung.
Yeah, Samsung. Be like behind the times here. TV, and what did that TV do? When it ostensibly was off, it allowed it record every conversation that went on in your bedroom or wherever it was placed. Okay. Now, this is the big one. On March 31st of 2017, I get a call 7:15 in the morning. Oh, Mr. McGovern, this is RT. Can you come in? Can you come in? I said, come in? You never called me this early. You called me around noon. Why you're not even open yet. You got to come in. We got Eurovision. You got, what's going on? We'll send you the link. So I send the link. It's Vault 7, Part 3, called Marble Framework. Now, what does that do? That allows the cyber tool in CIA's possession to intrude into a computer system or a server, disguise, the word is used, is obfuscate. Some of my old friends there in CIA know these big words. Obfuscate who hacked in, and then leave telltale signs like, oh, well, it showed that they worked in 5 languages: Persian, Arabic, Chinese, Korean, and Russian, Cyrillic. So, wow, that was interesting, right? So, I looked at that, I said, that is interesting, and I had to get in there by 9 o'clock, so here I am driving in the carpool lane, you know, alone, you know, for the cause, right? And I said, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? So, You call Bill Binney, right? And he tells you what to say. No, it's very easy. And that's the beauty of having this veteran intelligence professionals representing. You've got specialists that won't quit in very, very different areas. And of course, I was there when they started developing this. It's developed by NSA, they're the specialists, but they give it to CIA to do the dirty work, okay? Now, tell them this, right? Vault 7 involves 700 million lines of code. So McGovern says, that sounds like a lot, Bill. Hey, Ray. He says, each line of code costs $25. Can you do multiplication, Ray? Yeah, I can do that math. So we're talking billions of dollars, right? Now, Marble framework was, Bill says, at least 100 or 200 million of those codes. And what did it do? Well, I explained what it did. When that hit the fan, I have to tell you that the Washington Post reporter, Ellen Nakashima, she didn't get the memo. And so she, to her credit, reported on it right away. She said, headline, Washington Post the next day, WikiLeaks' latest release of CIA cyber tools could blow the cover on agency hacking operations. Whoa! She pointed out that the obfuscation tool could be used to conduct forensic attribution double game or false flag operations. Okay? Now, why do you suppose this didn't appear in the New York Times? Or after that one, after Ellen Nakashima got the memo in the Washington Post, why do you suppose it appeared anyway? Well, it's very clear. The mainstream media goes to CIA and says, should we report this? And they say, no, don't report this. You know, people aren't real smart, but they might say, oh, there was a hack in the DNC. Oh, and there were telltale signs in Cyrillic. Ah, yeah, like the name of the first head of the KGB, Felix Seymonovich Dzerzhinsky. Wow. They might say, oh, I wonder, could it be possible that these cyber tools in the arsenal of CIA were really responsible for this? Bill Binney and I, we can't argue from flat fact here. It's not as we can prove that the hack didn't. We can prove that hack didn't happen by the principle of physics called fluid dynamics. Okay, you can't get so much more stuff through a pipe to an internet than it will tolerate. But this one, we're pretty convinced that it was. Well, we say did it. The Directorate for Innovation Technology at the CIA, created by John Brennan the year before 2015. So, where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us with an explanation as to why James Comey thought, well, you better not send his specialists in to look at the DNC computers, because, my God, what would they find? What might they find? Yeah, they might find Marble framework, huh? So it explains a lot of things, and it's very disconcerting to think that Comey was in on this whole thing. He knew about it. He knew if he sent his experts there to look at the DNC computers, they would come back and say, Mr. Comey, my God, you won't believe what we found in here. We can't figure it out. Should we go to NSA to task? No, don't go to NSA. Don't go to NSA. So that's as phony as it is. And so from the conceptual framework of the Russians, I can't believe that they could have approved or favored Trump, to the nitty-gritty on the technical front, which we have real experts to tell us the truth, to the whole business about how they're playing Russiagate now and how everyone knows that the Russians intruded. It's a pretty sad story, and people like me who have this old-fashioned view from our intelligence analysis experience that it's really good to find out what the truth is, okay, no matter what it is, you know. Well, people say, well, you must be favoring Trump. I say, my God, yeah. Trump is the worst president the United States ever had. But if you don't have enough reason to get rid of him on all these other things, including the fact that my grandchildren, 9 of them, will not have clean air to breathe or clean water to drink when they're my age, if you can't get rid of this guy without a phony setup here, like Russiagate, then, you know, there's no hope for you. So maybe I'll quit there because I've got her at 15.
Well, we got another few people. Thank you, Ray. We'll get back now is from outside of the city. It's amazing. Anya Parapil is actually from Washington State, right? And you live in New York. You live in D.C. and she works with RT. I've done her show a few times. She is a anchor at RT, and it's one of the few places that I'm able to go in. I've been getting a lot of press that I really don't want. And the only place I can really talk honestly, and they don't box me in like Gary Melber does on MSNBC, is RT. I do RT, and I've done her show. And why don't we start? Go to you right now. How has it been for RT and for you? Cover? No, it's directional. Okay, and Anya. So tell us about your experience covering Russiagate for RT.
Well, I guess I would start by saying that I joined RT in 2014, which, if you remember, was the year that an anchor named Liz Wall kind of staged a resignation live on television in light of what was going on in Ukraine, what she described as Putin's invasion of Crimea, and claimed that she was working for a network that pushed propaganda that she was uncomfortable with. She'd of course been working for the network for 3 years and apparently had just figured out what the R in RT stood for. And I joined actually that week. And Max can talk about this a little bit more, but that resignation really was a turning point in RT because it was the first time I think that it had been put on the national map as a Putin influencing propaganda network. Now, after she went on to, after she staged this resignation, suddenly everyone was talking about RT in a way that they never had before. People were paying attention to RT, and I think it was because RT does provide another perspective on international affairs. And for the first time after what happened in Ukraine, I think the U.S. government was actually threatened by allowing this different perspective airtime. And so since then, in the 4 years that I've worked for RT since, you know, mainly covering issues of criminal justice here in the United States. You know, one of the main things I covered was the Black Lives Matter movement. And the uprising in Baltimore, people upset with police killings, you know, things that now, according to the director of the Office of National Intelligence, is a Russian influencing operation. You know, to talk about Black Lives Matter and the adverse health effects of fracking, according to our government, is something that Putin directs us to do. I can tell you that's, from my experience, that's not true. What you have to understand about RT, what you have to understand about RT is that if you came into my office, you would meet many Americans like me who have left-wing politics and want to talk about these issues, actually believe in a different kind of foreign policy, anti-imperialist foreign policy. We don't like to see the United States bossing around, you know, trying to get its way in the Middle East when it comes to Syria, Libya, things like that. We actually believe in this and want to talk about it, and we're told that we're doing this at the direction of a foreign government. And it's been difficult because as a result of the ODNI report, which I'm sure we'll talk more about later, RT was actually forced to register as a foreign agent lobbying group, something the U.S. government has never asked a foreign media outlet to do. I mean, what is the difference between what we do and what Al Jazeera or the BBC or France 24, any other international network that operates in this country does? We're the only one that was forced to register under FARA, the Foreign Agent Registration Act. They threatened to actually, the U.S. Justice Department threatened to arrest the news director of my network for failing to register. So I think that says a lot about the free press in our country, because, as I said, this was never asked of any other network that gets foreign funding, and I would ask why we're such a threat. Why is what we do such a threat? I think it has to do with the fact that we bring people like Randy, we bring people like Ray, someone I've interviewed many times on my show, to talk about global affairs and things like WikiLeaks that for some reason really gets Washington frightened. And I can talk more about all this later, but I think that's where I'll leave it for my opening remarks.
Okay, thank you. And the one and only Max Blumenthal, my good buddy, who's done about 9 stories on me. Whenever somebody lies about me, he comes out and straightens it out, gets a million tweets, and he's got books out. He just got back with Anya from Gaza, or from Israel, and covering that entire affair. It gets you into a lot of trouble, I know, right? It does get you. You're not their favorite person.
This gets me in more trouble this time.
Probably. This probably does.
This is the
all right.
third
So,
round.
but he's been covering WikiLeaks. He was on the other day. It was a great interview on RT International, I think. And why don't you take it from there, Max?
Well, what do you think as far as a time frame would be best?
How much time to do?
Yeah.
An hour. No. 10 minutes.
All right,
10,
10
12
minutes.
minutes. All right. And then Dennis. All right.
I just want to thank Randy for bringing me on this panel and for everything he's done for criminal justice and getting this discussion going. And I think he deserves a round of applause. I never would have seen myself sitting on a panel talking about anything Russia related maybe 2 years ago or so, but I feel like the situation has been forced on those of us who don't want to be approaching a new Cold War or possibly a new hot war. And that's really where I stand. It comes from no particular affinity for Russia's contemporary system. And that's about as much respectability politics as you're going to squeeze out of me. That's pretty much my only qualification. I just think we have to look at the history here. I don't know if anyone went into this at any point, but Russiagate comes out of a historical context. Many of you probably might know it even better than I do, but it has to be put on record. I feel like I kind of lived through it growing up, during the Cold War, and then coming out of it and seeing America and its premier intellectuals declare the end of history. But I was at my friend Yasha Levine's place last night. He's done a lot of great writing for the exile from inside Russia during the one of the most pivotal periods leading up to Russiagate, and is now here. And he had a book on his coffee table, Privatizing Russia, by Robert Schleifer and various other economists. This isn't a book about privatizing Russia from a critical point of view. It's how they did it. It was basically their blueprint. Robert Schleifer came out of Harvard. He was installed by Larry Summers, who was one of Clinton's top economists, to basically loot Russia's economy. Andrew Schleifer. Andrew Schleifer?
Yeah, not Robert Schleifer.
Okay.
Sure.
I think so. I know there's also
We've got an extra minute.
Anders Aslan and various other economists came in, and they were actually enriching companies that many of them had a stake in. And, it led to people bartering their goods on the streets, just this feeling of complete chaos, and that this great nation that had once existed was being weakened from the outside and absolutely destroyed. It was like a Mad Max atmosphere. The poor and the old who were depending on their pensions under the Soviet Union and on public benefits, some of them just literally died. There were 3 to 5 million excess deaths. That means almost 5 million people just dropped off the face of the earth. Poverty reached such a point that 90 million people were in poverty. That's up from 3 million people under the Soviet Union. Then we went in when Yeltsin, our guy, was running in 1996 against a communist candidate. And we sent Pete Wilson's consultants, this moderate Republican from California. We sent Pete Wilson's consultants to steal the election. You can see Spinning Boris is a pretty good comedy that's actually pretty subversive by today's standards. You should all watch that great film with Jeff Goldblum and see how we stole the '96 election to keep this project going. All along, we were expanding NATO. George Washington University's National Security Archive has finally produced proof of what everybody already knew, which is that the George H.W. Bush administration lied to Gorbachev and his national security team and diplomatic team and promised that they would not expand NATO beyond Germany. And then we proceeded to do so and put advanced missile systems on Russia's borders, something the United States would never have allowed to take place on its own borders. Which leads to this siege mentality, drives the siege mentality. Yeltsin basically becomes too drunk to continue on. He appoints Vladimir Putin, who had been involved in he was actually involved in the privatization project in St. Petersburg, and he was close to the Anatoly Chubais and the kind of guys who had been around Gorbachev and moved into Yeltsin's administration as the partners of the Harvard boys. And everyone thought, oh, Putin's going to be great, he's going to keep this thing going. And if you go back to 2000, 2001, you can find a lot of people, including Bill Browder, praising Putin. What he proceeds to do is start throwing the oligarchs in prison. The oligarchs who wouldn't pay into Russia's economy from Yukos oil and so on. And this sent shockwaves through the national security state in the US and through the foreign policy establishment in Washington. Putin was no socialist. He was basically recentering the economy around a kind of state capitalist model. We responded with color revolutions. In Georgia, removing Edward Shevardnadze first, then moving on to Ukraine with the Orange Revolution. These were revolutions that may have been guided by the CIA, but were carried out through foundations like the Open Society Institute, the National Endowment for Democracy, which is mostly US funded. And we created private media to drive these revolutions. And many of the students who participated in them were earnest, good-hearted people who thought, we just want freedom, we just want what the West has to offer, but they were ultimately used as pawns in a geopolitical game that continued this process of destabilization. At the Munich Security Conference in 2007, Putin stands up with John McCain sitting next to Joe Lieberman in the front row. I think it was Lieberman. Yeah. Joe Mentum, remember that? Yeah. He was his only endorsement for president was from the New Republic under Marty Peretz. It's really inspiring. You should go back and look at that video and look at the look on John McCain's face when Putin speaks and he says, "We will now act in Russia's national security and national interests, and we will not tolerate expansion on our borders any further." And he basically puts his foot down, and that was, I think, when this process, the new Cold War, really started to intensify. The next year, Georgia invades South Ossetia, which was Russian territory. We're constantly told Russia invaded. No, it was a Georgian invasion by Mikhail Saakashvili, who himself was a CIA National Endowment for Democracy project, who was egged on by the US. He wound up eating his tie on national television, literally, and got stomped. Another event that sent shockwaves through the national security state in the US. Putin steps aside to Medvedev. After 2008, Medvedev comes in and basically was not particularly popular in Russia. The Libya events really showed how Medvedev's presence actually frightened Russia's military intelligence apparatus, because what Russia did at the UN when there was this critical vote on whether to allow was a no-fly zone in Libya, they abstained. What's Libya now? Open-air slave auctions, the destabilization of North Africa, the rise of Boko Haram. The arms flow out to the south, and they flow out to Libya, to Syria. Complete chaos. Putin steps back in, says we got to restabilize. He steps back in after the Magnitsky sanctions come in. Magnitsky sanctions were the product of Bill Browder, someone who's widely hailed as this great Russia expert today. He was at Hermitage Capital. He was one of the oligarchs. I think he's actually the grandson of Earl Browder, who was, yeah, I'm not joking. He had come to Russia to loot the economy. He owed something like $240 million in taxes. And the standard story, official story, is that his lawyer was beaten to death in a Russian prison, Sergei Magnitsky. If you watch Andrei Nekrasov's film, which is effectively banned in the US, Browder has prevented it from being shown at the European Parliament. You watch this film, you're going to see an entirely different story. This Norwegian filmmaker who is anti-Putin started following Browder around thinking he was going to make this film about this great dissident, and found out that he was an international con artist and vulture capitalist who had basically used his personal fortune to doctor American foreign policy and engineer a 99-to-1 vote in the U.S., or 99-to-0 vote in the U.S. Congress to sanction Russia unprovoked. I mean, there was no clear provocation for these sanctions. The Magnitsky sanctions, deepened the sense of enmity and mistrust and the fear in Russia that the U.S. is coming back for more. And now the Magnitsky sanctions, by the way, have been expanded to the global Magnitsky sanctions, so they're now being applied against Venezuela. They will soon be used to destroy Nicaragua's economy, and so on. So we have to see the repercussions of the Cold War globally. Ukraine is next, the Maidan. Everyone remembers that. It was another color revolution style operation with many of the figures in the Maidan supported by the foundations, National Endowment for Democracy, Open Society Institute, along with the street muscle of right sector, Pravdy sector, who are Nazis. I remember at the time the neocon Jamie Kirchik wrote about Putin's imaginary Nazis in foreign policy. Well, those imaginary Nazis just celebrated an SS battalion last month in the open. They've renamed streets after Stepan Bandera and Roman Shukevich, who were involved in the pogroms of Jews. They actually renamed the street that leads to Baba Yar, the site of Jewish extermination, after Stepan Bandera. So I don't think we can imagine. I mean, they're real. Those Nazis are real. And this is the part of, you have to understand the fear of Russia to have Nazis on their border. And then, of course, Syria. I don't want to spend more than 10 seconds on it, but we enacted a $1 billion program to arm and equip what we consider to be moderate rebels in the only allied state in the Arab League, the only state allied with Russia. So Nazis and jihadists coming at you on your borders or in the middle of your allied states, marching on their capitals. Anya mentioned the RT incident with Liz Wall. This, as I wrote for Truthdig, was engineered by the Foreign Policy Institute, which was a rebranding of the Project for the New American Century of Robert Kagan and William Kristol. Same board of directors, pretty much the same sources of funding. Paul Singer, vulture capitalist, pro-Israel vulture capitalist Paul Singer backed this whole operation. Just different faces like Jamie Kirchik, who are the next generation of neocons. And they engineered Liz Wall's resignation on air on RT to not just humiliate RT, but to cast it as this Kremlin influencing operation. And to some extent, they succeeded with the complete support of mainstream US media. I'll kind of end it in the 2016 campaign because we kind of know what happened next. But a lot of these I would just point out that a lot of these figures who were involved with Liz Wall and recruiting her, and who are actually have tried to recruit other figures out of RT, which is something I know about. They centered around the Free Beacon, which is a neoconservative publication in Washington, and Orion Strategies, which is a lobbying firm that represented the Saakashvili government of Georgia. And that group was the original group that funded the creation of the Steele dossier before it was passed on to Perkins Coie, the law firm close to Hillary Clinton and its campaign and the DNC that funded the Steele dossier, the dodgy dossier, which was really used as the narrative basis for Russiagate. That's how the media was able to understand Trump-Russia collusion and Russia's nefarious actions to interfere and meddle in the West. The Steele dossier was dropped, and I'm just going to end it here. The Steele dossier was dropped in January 2017. It was not only funded first by the neocons, then by the Clinton campaign, but James Comey, the FBI director, was planning to pay for it until its existence was exposed in October 2016. And then it was publicly revealed after James Clapper, director of national intelligence, he oversees the FBI and the CIA. He sent James Comey to brief Donald Trump on the existence of the dossier. Then he leaked to Jake Tapper. It was like a handoff from Clapper to Tapper. He leaked to Jake Tapper that Trump was being briefed on this dossier, the dossier that Comey himself had attempted to fund. And from there, it was reported in CNN. Jake Tapper and his team with Carl Bernstein, who's been telling the whole Beltway press corps that they're covering something worse than Watergate, just won an award at the White House Press Correspondents Association, where Randy was thrown out of. They got up on stage and won an award for the story that was basically just leaked to them by Jim Clapper. They just took dictation from the top spook and then won an award for it, which shows how the Beltway press corps is patting itself on the back for this operation. Then 2 days later, BuzzFeed just releases the full dossier. Trump comes out before the Washington press corps at Jim Acosta badgering him, yeah, what about Russia? What about Russia? And Trump says, fake news, fake news. And then, the whole public is talking about the P tape and all the salacious details, and Russiagate becomes this mainstream phenomenon. So you have a confluence of interests, the never-Trumpers and the Clinton people, and, they want to oppose Trump without talking about the economy or anything, real. And then you have the neocons and the national security state, whose interests I laid out here, and now it's their world and we're living in it.
Max She wants to hear the whole thing in. That was great. Thank you. That was really good. All right, so anybody who wants to get out now, get out, but if you have to. So now we're going to continue this, and we're going to go to my good friend. Dennis has been covering Russiagate from the outset, both on KPFA and in Consortium News. In fact, I thought you'd be on the Consortium News panel because you were very, very close with the founder, right?
Well, and we miss Robert Perry. And
Yeah.
everybody here familiar with Robert Perry? It's good to be with you all, and I know you've had this feeling, as I have. I'm watching some idiot on corporate TV just to sort of figure out what they're not going to say today. And somebody says something really stupid, probably Rachel Maddow. And I say to myself, oh, I can't wait to see how Bob Perry reacts to this. And he's not there. So we miss him. Good friend. But Consortium News is alive and well. There is going to be an event tomorrow to celebrate the life and work of Robert Perry, and I recommend you go check it out. If you don't know who he is, you should find out about Consortium News. I have to admit that when I was watching Ray being sort of brutalized, it was also an interesting experience in the nature of what happens now in terms of the flow of information. Because what we were watching was 4 heavy-set young men rough the hell out of Ray. Who I know you're 78, but I know you've got a 38-year-old's DNA, and you keep marching on. But the interesting part of that, other than being horrified about what was happening to Ray, was the way in which the story was forming. Ray was resisting. The press is reporting it as Ray is resisting, because you hear these 4 armed guards say, stop resisting, but they're kicking the shit out of him. So do you believe what you see, experience, know, can verify both informationally and heart and mind? Or do you follow the narrative, what they in the corporate media are telling you is happening? Is it what you experience, or is it a big lie? And that's sort of I just want to bring it back to Julian Assange and John Pilger. Why John Pilger spoke up for Julian Assange and how important he is, because it's not the Russiagate frenzy has been very troubling. Of course, the corporate media has made a lot of money on this. I think Rachel Maddow is up to $7 million as long as she shuts up and only talks Russiagate. The network corporate executives have bragged about, yeah, Trump's a bad guy, but boy, did we do well on this story. But the media didn't do well. And part of the real shame are the stories that get missed because the corporate media refuses. Their silence makes them possible. I just want to say a few things about that. as we've seen all this crap on TV and all this time wasted spent on a phony investigation. We've seen emergent famines. We've seen the slaughter, the US-supported Saudi slaughter that's unfolding, that's leading to a famine. We see the beginnings of starvation. We don't see it being reported on. And this, I think, is the great loss when we see all this misreporting, non-reporting. And I know Max could talk a lot more thoroughly about this, but I just have to mention, and I'll leave it there, that Rachel Maddow makes it a practice of studying, she says, she implies, all the documents of Russiagate, all the indictments. She knows everything about everything. The minutia, no minutia escapes her. But, and she loves Russiagate, right? And she loves the collusion story. She loves that word collusion. Collusion and the Trump administration. Well, there was collusion. The collusion was between the emerging Trump administration and the Israelis to suppress a pro-Palestinian vote at the United Nations. That's what we missed with this kind of horrific reporting. And my frame of reference, and what the great reporters do, like the ones sitting at this table, and the truth tellers, is it comes out of the great reporting of Amira Haas, who works for Haaretz. She has been reporting from the West Bank for many years. You know, she's got more death threats probably than anybody in this world for telling the truth. And what did she say? What is the responsibility of journalists? To monitor the center of power. Monitor the centers of power, whether they be in the government, in the corporation, wherever it's happening, and report back to the people. Monitor the centers of power and report back to the people. That is the one and only job of the people, of the reporters, and their responsibility to the people. I think that's what they used to mean by the Fourth Estate. And I mourn the loss of journalism, except for the folks who have popped up, who have joined us today, and who keep doing the good work. And Randy's courage in taking on the story of Julian Assange and doing his endless multi-part series that never ends. That, you know,
Like the Twilight Zone.
like that's what it's about. So I thank you, Randy, Ray, everybody at the table, and thank you all.
Julian Assange, he knew all about this, but he's been put under such a gag right now. He can't say anything political. So I was unable to even get a statement. I went down to DC last week with the express purpose of letting Adam Schiff know that if he requested it, a visit with Julian Assange, it would be granted. That was it. And I came back and I did the Ari Melber show, and he knew that I was down there, and he says to me, well, Mr. Credico, you finally relented and you testified in front of Mr. Schiff. I said, wait a second, that's not why I went down there. I had to tell him the truth. I was trying to suppress that, not say anything about this meeting. But he found out about it, and I said, that's not, I didn't go to testify. I can tell you that. I said to them, I told Schiff to just get away from this Russiagate deal. Deal with the economy, deal with housing, deal with education, deal with the criminal justice system. Why are you wasting? The Democrats are going to lose this election. This is the only play they got. They're down at the 5-yard line. They could pick up 100 seats, but they keep running the same play up the middle, and they're back at the 50. You know, it's not working. They fumble the ball. What are we going to do now? Let's go up the middle of Russiagate. Oh, thrown back for a loss. All right. So, and especially this Roger Stone. Stop giving this guy any credibility. Just leave him out. Stop. He loves it. He's eating it up. He had nothing to do with this at all. He insinuated himself into the story because he's an egomaniac and Trump had dumped him and he wanted to get back in. So he went fishing. He came to me and I blew him off a bunch of times. I had him on my radio show and everybody at BAI hated that, but I had him on. But I also had Julian Assange, I also had Gary Johnson, I had a wide variety. I can't have Chris Hedges on every day. You know what I mean? I gotta have a variety of guests. Or Noam Chomsky. I mean, they're on all the time. There's got to be other voices. And they're all, those guys are great. Just you know, I'm looking for variety. I'm in show business too. So, so we have more people coming in. We could have, I think there's, no, we don't have a stream in the other room. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I want, because I know Assange is going to know about this, and everybody, 1 minute. How important is Julian Assange and WikiLeaks? And I'll start with you, Anya, and go right up to Dennis.
Well, I would say my experience with WikiLeaks began during the Arab Spring when we saw a massive protest movement in the country of Tunisia, which actually had some pretty damning WikiLeaks cables released concerning the State Department, where they spoke about the then leader Ben Ali as being a tool and doing whatever the United States wanted, and at the same time they were experiencing a real economic crisis in Tunisia, and as we know, the catalyst for what ended up being a revolution there was a fruit vendor who self-immolated on the street. But it was what WikiLeaks provided in terms of real State Department government documents saying what everybody knew was the case, and that's across the board. It wasn't just in Tunisia, but for the first time, I think journalists who'd been covering international politics had very real and relevant documents to inform their reporting about the world, and it can actually fuel revolution. And then, of course, what we know about the Iraq War, thanks to the Iraq war logs, and the way we've been able to see some crimes committed by our military with our own eyes, also has the power, I think, to hopefully move people to resist that kind of war in the future, though sometimes I feel a little bit disturbed about where the anti-war movement is or isn't. But I would just say I think what WikiLeaks did in releasing, and the same thing with the DNC emails. I mean, again, something everybody knew, that the Democratic Party had rigged the race in favor of Hillary Clinton, and we could be saying that now but not have the evidence. Well, we have the evidence now, and everybody knew it, but we can see them plotting this with our own eyes. So that's a very threatening thing to the establishment. That's why they want to silence WikiLeaks. That's why I personally believe they want to silence RT. But all we can do is hope that we keep that WikiLeaks stays strong and that we can continue to get that information.
Max?
Yeah, I second all that. I was watching The Post. You know, this. Don't ask me why I was bored. I want to know what liberals think these days, and it isn't hard to find out. I mean, and you know, I think there's some value in this Spielberg film about Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers. I mean, I have my criticisms too, but you know, everybody celebrates Daniel Ellsberg today. You know, even in Washington, and obviously this film was released because of Russiagate, and that everyone wanted to think that it was the next Watergate. But you know, it just got me thinking about the comparison between Assange and Ellsberg. What did Assange do that Ellsberg didn't do? Well, I mean, he didn't personally steal classified information. He basically exposed it, as any journalist would. But Assange is the demon of many of the people who went to see The Post and whose principal complaint about or fear about press freedom is that Donald Trump says mean things about the press. But many of these same people would like to have Julian Assange's head on a stake. And there's a lot of hypocrisy there. I personally don't agree with everything that Julian would say on his Twitter account. I'm not here to endorse everything Julian believes. I'm here to just simply say he is a journalist who's performed some extremely valuable tasks. He should be treated as a journalist, and it is pretty abundantly clear that the US has a secret indictment to extradite Julian Assange, that there is a campaign of psychological torture being enacted against Julian Assange to force him out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London so that he will be snatched and grabbed and taken, and as Adam Schiff, the Grand Inquisitor on the House Intelligence Committee said, be put into US custody, could be held under duress again, as Chelsea Manning was, put on trial, and he would be the first journalist, I think, the first journalist on trial and put on trial in US history for revealing classified documents. And that is a terrifying precedent that every journalist should stand up against, and it's just shocking to me and extremely tragic that the journalistic community has treated Assange as the CIA under Mike Pompeo has branded him as a hostile foreign intelligence agency rather than as a journalist, and that so many of Assange's former allies, his allies before the Trump era, came and scared everyone and freaked everyone out, have abandoned him. I, previously didn't speak that much about Assange, but now it's so obvious what's going on, and it's time to just simply stand up on principle.
A non-state hostile intelligence agency, Pompeo, called Julian that 13 days after the release of Vault 7 Part 3, which showed, to my satisfaction and to Bill Binney's, that it was not the Russians that hacked into the DNC. It was John Brennan and his digital directorate that he set up. What do I say? Well, I remember about 7 years ago, CNN and everyone else was saying that Julian Assange was a terrorist. Do you remember that? He was a terrorist, right? And CNN had so many people on saying he was a terrorist that somebody said, you should have somebody who might say he's not a terrorist. So they asked McGovern. So he goes in there, and Don Lemon, Don Lemon? Yeah. So he says, wait, you really think he's not a terrorist? You think he's a journalist? Really? Oh, come on. So it went down okay for my purposes, but of course I haven't been on CNN since. That was 7 years ago. They started out the segment, without telling me, with video from Bonnie and Clyde, okay, shooting people up, terrorists and all that kind of stuff. So, collateral murder, when you see not only the brutalization of Iraqis, including journalists, but the brutalization of our own troops, that's hard to take. And many people have not seen that. I show it usually when I speak at colleges, and they've never even heard of it, okay? Now, I'll just say one more thing here. I guess it should be mentioned that the UN has twice said that Julian Assange should be walking free. That should mean something, but it doesn't anymore, and that's just a symptom of how disregard for international law has taken hold. The worst intelligence analysis memorandum that I've ever seen was the January 6 memorandum, which said, we know that Putin, or we assessed that Putin directed the hacking and directed the interference in the election, and we assessed this and we assessed that. We also assessed this, but our assessment could be wrong, but that's the way we assess, okay? This is the one that was assessed with high confidence 12 days before Obama said what he said. We can't figure out how this hack got to WikiLeaks. That's the President of the United States, okay? So what am I saying here? I'm saying that in that very document, in trying to explain why the Russian hackers, in quotes, would give this stuff to WikiLeaks, they gave Julian Assange an incredible left-hand compliment. They said because it never changes anything. People think it's authentic, think it's the real deal. That's why they chose to go to WikiLeaks. Well, hello,
that's where it is. And when I go on radio, when I'm asked, I always say, look, the distinctive thing here is that he's dealing in documents. He's dealing in the kind of evidence that intelligence analysts or journalists or investigative reporters lust after. Documents, okay? He doesn't change them. And the last thing I'll say on that is simply that when Hillary Clinton and her crew found out that Julian had, as he described them on June 12, 2016, emails relating to Hillary Clinton, which were about to be published, that was about 6 weeks before the DNC, or before the Democratic National Convention, right? So you could see them sitting around the table. You know, oh my God, are they going to find, if they have the documents, they will show how we cheated Bernie out of the nomination. My God, this is awful, what are we going to do? And somebody says, well, you know what we do? We'll blame it on the Russians. We say, the Russians? It's not the Russians, it's Julian Assange. That's okay. We'll get a twofer here. We hate Julian Assange as much as the Russians. So we'll say that the Russians hacked and they gave it to Julian Assange. Everybody kind of sat around the table and said, Hillary says, anybody got a better idea? No. They went with it, okay? They went with it immediately, and when the convention took place, and I have this personally from Jennifer Palmieri, her PR person, she was instructed to go around and talk to everyone who would listen to her and talk about the Russians did it. And so when the emails came out from WikiLeaks, nobody paid any attention, the press or anybody else, to what was in the emails. Namely that Bernie had been tricked, had been cheated out of the Democratic nomination. Bernie knew it. And I don't know, man, I don't understand politics, but I would have liked to have him call for an open convention at that point. It was so clear. How did they avoid it? What I call, you know that novel Magnificent Obsession? Well, this was a magnificent diversion that got the whole media saying, why the Russians do it, why the Russians do it, why the Russians do it, and nobody took any cognizance of the fact that that Bernie was cheated out of the nomination. So that's about as bad as it gets. Julian, as a journalist, does his job, to do the things that were so well explained here by Dennis, to make people aware of what's going on at the centers of power, and then, of course, the media here, and that's the real fly in the ointment, have the ability to disregard it, suppress it, or, as in Vault 7, only report it very selectively.
Very good, Randy.
Thank you, Randy. Go ahead.
So,
that down. You want that or this? Okay.
thanks, Ray. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to repeat read a statement at the beginning of this workshop for those of you who weren't here, but I want to just repeat a part of what John Pilger says
A little louder.
I want to repeat a little bit about what John Pilger says about Assange. Julian stands vindicated as one who has exposed a system that threatens humanity. The collateral damage video, the war logs of Afghanistan and Iraq, the Cablegate revelations, the Venezuela revelations, the Podesta email revelations. These are just a few of the storms of raw truth that have blown through the capitals of rapacious power. Again, I agree with Max. You don't have to love anything anybody does. But if you look at the core of their work and the implications, the impact, you cannot deny that Julian Assange has become one of the most significant, shall we say, reporting publishers of our time. His work has helped to change history. And let me say it this way, it turns my freaking stomach when I watch reporters become prosecutors before the cameras. All of a sudden, they don't want to see these documents. They don't want to know this truth. He's anti-American. That's what Bob Perry was called when he was trying to report some of the stories he was reporting on around Contra. They told him, this isn't good. For the country. Of course, Bob said, no, what you mean is this isn't good for the people in power. Exactly. Julian Assange was not good for the people in power. He questioned that old, abused phrase, but it means everything here. He questioned authority at all levels and did, in fact, speak up, spoke his truth to power all over the world, and he clearly is suffering. And you just have to look at the extraordinarily horrific treatment of Chelsea Manning. 7 years in virtual solitary to understand how bad Adam Schiff would love to see Julian Assange in cuffs. That is really up to us in terms of being able to prevent it. Speaking up, speaking out, as my good friend Randy Credico has done on Assange's behalf through his amazing series. You should get that series, but I don't think you can get it through BAI. It's pretty difficult. There are other ways to do it. Thank you.
All right, thank Dennis. That was great. I don't like anything that that Wolf Blitzer has to say, but I don't think he should be removed from television just because I don't agree with anything that he says editorially. And so that goes with a lot of people in journalism. I don't like Rachel Maddow. Do I think that she should be thrown off? No, and they can keep their station. I don't care. Just don't try to do that with people like
But
Max.
they should let us have a station.
Let everybody hear. I mean, Anya at RT's a great, if you watch RT, they do great reportage. They really do. They recover. I do it, and I get people say, don't do RT. I said, I did it 3 times in the last week, all right? Because I get stuck. I did Ari Melber's show, and he's so afraid I'm going to say something that they pre-tape me now. Everybody else is live. I was live, and he's like on eggshells, being nervous, because you don't know what I'm going to say. And so they cut out 2 minutes when they taped me. They pre-taped me last week, and they took out 2 minutes. So I won't do that show again unless it's live. They never pre-tape me at RT. Loud and Clear does, but they never do. That's the radio show. They always pre-tape me. But I do it live in the morning on the other show at 8 o'clock with Lee Stranahan, right? He does me live. But I get a lot of heat for doing those networks. But, Al Jazeera, BBC, the history of BBC, it's a government control. In World War I, they were there to promote the war, the British war against Russia, against Germany. They were there to promote that war, right? That's why they were created. They didn't want people to see the horrors of that war. A lot of money was made off of that war. All right, I'm going to open this up. Now, maybe people on this panel have a question to somebody else on the panel, or do we go to the audience?
Then we go to the audience.
All right, let's go to the audience and...
Take several at once, man.
All right, you do it. All right, you choose then.
You're the host.
You're the host, yes.
Okay, so we'll take 3 and then answer 3. You in green, you in black.
So, thank you for great presentations. First of all, can somebody elaborate, or more than one of you, talk a little bit more in more detail about how it is you understand Assange has come to be put in the situation that he currently in? What's going on that has led to this silencing? If you have any understanding about that, number one. Number two, on Ray's points about Trump, just to interrogate, so to speak, the narrative, Russiagate narrative a little bit, could it be argued that Trump was a desirable outcome from a Russian government point of view in that he is such a catastrophe, and that a catastrophe for the United States might not be entirely unfavorable for the Russian government for Putin, under Putin's leadership? And secondly, the idea that which I think is implicit in this narrative, that he is under the control, in effect, if there is, a foreign, he's under the control of the Russian government in some way because they have the goods on him. And then finally, Andrei Schleifer, it was not Andrew Schleifer, it was Andrei Schleifer. And just quickly, he was head of HIID at Harvard University when he was engaged in this reform of the markets in Russia. And afterwards, this is how Harvard operates, they made HIID disappear, and they created something new, the Center for International Development, which Jeff Sachs was the head of originally until he got sick of it and came down here to New York. So Harvard has a way of making things disappear.
So we'll take that and the two other ones, but I think it would be nice if we try and limit the question to one
question. All right.
question, so it makes it easier for all of us to respond.
Oh, okay. I'm Julie Weiner, and I've been for a number of years an election integrity transparency activist. And there is a lot of evidence that there are other ways in which the election was thrown. I'm going to refer you, for example, to a paper, An Electoral System in Crisis by Lulu Friesdat and Anselmo Sampletro, which gives still more statistical evidence beyond the exit polls that there were a number of elections thrown. This one particularly refers to New York State, where the primaries were altered apparently by computer rigging. I'm assuming that rather than hacking, because of who had an interest in preventing the Sanders campaign from having an increase, having higher votes. So I'm concerned about this problem of the vulnerability of our election computers to, quote, hacking. As number one, I wonder if you can talk to the Russiagate as being a cover for the election rigging that's actually taking place, the computer rigging. And number two, I wonder about the use of this crisis of the computer, the problem of vulnerability of computers to hacking as an opportunity for the deep state to impose centralized control of our election system, to count the votes themselves, for example, has been proposed in some legislation. Well, I want you to just talk to the election rigging issue, the
I know, but I just want everybody to make the question short.
Is that what it's?
No, I'm just saying, we only have 30
short.
minutes left. I want everybody to keep it. No, that's a good question. I'm not saying it's not a good question. Whoever's next, gets to keep it to one question.
I'm going to keep it really long.
All right.
I'm
Because
Georgina.
other
I'm
people
at
will
the
ask
New School,
questions.
and I'm doing my master's thesis on the Panama Papers, which is just as important, I think, more important than WikiLeaks. So I just want to, I want some comments, general comments on what you think on it, and also possibly, how do we keep our sources, because the source is still anonymous, how do we keep sources safe?
Let's answer that last question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the Panama Papers concerns banking. Does anyone want to speak on the I would just want to answer your last question, which is how do we keep sources safe? And I think it is to protect institutions like WikiLeaks, give people who might have access to these documents a place to go, where they're not going to be picked through by, the New York Times, and instead we have access to the documents and the ability to sift through them as journalists and reporters ourselves. So that, I think, is the best way to protect sources. Obviously, WikiLeaks goes through great lengths to protect those sources.
Just on the Panama Papers, this is produced by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, am I right? The Bureau of Investigative Journalism has partnered with Western centrist entities like the New York Times and the Guardian to selectively promote parts of the Panama Papers that advance American and Western soft power, and they've singled out certain Russian oligarchs, including like Yuri Milman, who I think has actually absolutely no connection to the Kremlin and is a Silicon Valley figure. They've actually been used in many cases, or what the Bureau of Investigative Journalism has generally done is kind of to operate as a counter WikiLeaks operation. But there's still a lot of important stuff in the Panama Papers. I'm not denying that about international banking, but I would just maybe question whether it's at least it would be more important than WikiLeaks without denying its importance. That's just me. But I mean, you're welcome to, we can talk after, and I'm sure you know more about it than I do.
Sure. The ICIJ definitely has its issues, but it's got a lot of amazing programs too. I mean, the whole thing was an amazing project, but yeah, definitely problematic.
Here's how that came up for me. As soon as the Panama Papers came out, I started calling different journalists who had access, because I was very interested in finding out if the name Penny Pritzker came up. Does anybody know the name Penny Pritzker? The Pritzkers, everything that the banking industry has done wrong, the Pritzkers did it 20 years before everybody else. So she had already crashed an SNL and got out of the business of securing, using these phony securitization processes to make, to pair good bonds with bad bonds. In other words, Penny Pritzker was one of the architects of the crash of the 2008 banking scandal. Anyway, so I was wondering, and she was the master, her family was the master of offshore banking. And I hadn't seen anything offshore, shell games, the whole thing. They led the pack. By the way, this is the woman who, as finance chair of the 2008 Obama campaign, got him elected. Everybody wondered, how could this woman raise more money than the Clinton machine? Penny Pritzker, then she became, for that, the Secretary of Commerce. So I called some of the reporters and I said, have you come across the name Penny Pritzker? And they said, Penny Pritzker, who's that? It's a couple of reporters. Oh yeah, Secretary of Commerce. No, could you look, please? Can I look? Can you look? Can somebody look? And a couple of reporters helped me out, and actually the Pritzkers came up again and again in the Panama Papers, but somehow no journalist thought it was interesting to explore the person who elected Obama to office. So the content of the material and the release is crucial, but access is everything.
Do we want to go to the question about election vulnerabilities?
You're handling this now. You've taken over. It's yours. Yes. Go ahead.
Does anyone have
The question of
the vulnerabilities in our election system and how?
Greg Pallas would be good on that.
Yeah, that's what I was
Okay.
I was thinking of Greg Pallas when you were asking your question. That what was most shocking for me after the election was how a network like MSNBC, which you think in the good old days actually, did promote a kind of progressive message when it came to the Democratic Party. I thought they would care a lot about the fact that minorities, and you can read Greg Pallas' investigation. He's done great work on how this past election, tens of thousands of minorities were removed from state voting records because of a system called cross-check that's been run by Republican attorney generals, where they basically, if your name matches the name of someone else, which a lot of minority names repeat in cities and states, they'll just take both of you off the record. So when you go in to vote, yeah.
I think we have to distinguish between so-called voter fraud, by which they bump people from the road, and election integrity, which is what this lady has asked about, which is about the manipulation of the electronics.
Of the computers.
That is, and the relationship between, on the one hand, the idea that Russia hacked into the electronics.
Yeah, I mean, I
and
think
the other,
that's what Anya's saying, I think, is that we focused on the 21 state story, which I can talk about at the expense of talking about the very real, proven and demonstrable cases of black disenfranchisement.
I would say this probably played a much larger role. In, for example, a state like Michigan, more people were taken off the voting records and votes that Hillary lost by. So if you want,
Well, that happened in New York too. And
Right.
That's part of the story of the primary, where the people who were bumped from the roads, the girls that happened in California. But she's specifically asking about the relationship between Russian hacking into the electronics and other hacking into the electronics.
Or reading of the electronics
Yeah.
right at the source where they're programmed, which is
Right.
the likeliest explanation.
Yeah, so we've
What?
heard this story about 21 states. First of all, when it came out It was said to be in California, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and the Board of Elections in California, Michigan, and Wisconsin said there was absolutely no Russian hacking. That was never, the stories were never updated, and all of the wire agencies and mainstream press, I tweeted about it, I tweeted their statements. Glenn Greenwald wrote a piece demonstrating that these 3 states denied there was any Russian hacking or altering of votes. And then a Department of Homeland Security official, I clipped this out on CNN, he testified before the House. He was asked about the 21 states. Did Russia hack our 21 states? I want to know. How did they change the vote totals? Putin got in there and he hacked everyone's votes and hacked our brains. And and this Department of Homeland Security officials in charge of election integrity said no, there was no hacking. What we saw was scanning, and scanning is a routine practice. We often different outside forces are testing our election systems, and they're trying sometimes, usually, to just steal technology or see what kind of technology we're using. There was no vote totals altered, and it was very routine. It was scanning. Aaron Mate quoted that official in The Nation. I can provide that quote for you, but there's simply no evidence that Russia hacked the election systems of any states or altered any vote totals, and the theory is that they did scanning. So we have to differentiate between scanning and hacking and consider why we keep hearing this story without any
But if you look at
we have to keep it moving.
you will see that there were 4 states where the official results were outside the margin of error of the exit polls and reversed.
Whether or not Russia benefits from having Trump in office,
Yeah,
by having
it was
a
in
wild
Rochester too, it wasn't even
that
reported in the
US
newspapers,
policy.
massive
What do you
urging
think
of
on
students.
Yeah, I don't think that they're close to any border.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think Russia would ideally want a partner in the United States that they could work with on diplomatic issues in a predictable way and not have to, worry about whether or not Trump is going to pull out of a major summit. They don't want to be dealing with someone who's unpredictable like that, or that could just, bomb Syria on a whim because of social media posts.
Okay. I guess you don't think that it was the NRA collaboration
Right.
with
Right.
Russia to
That's why we're having
throw the
school
election.
shootings now, right?
Right.
Because
We
of
got
Russia.
10 minutes left. I want to keep it on Julian Assange, who is suffering at this moment.
Yeah, and
All
what
right.
about how it came about that he's in this condition?
I'll quickly say, the latest version is he tweeted out something about Catalan and the election. He tweeted out something, because he was one of the few reporters talking about the independence movement in Catalan, whether you agree with it or not. If you like his point of view or not, that's what he was doing at that time. The only one. And so there was a lot of pressure on him to stop doing that. They had the vote and they won. 98% of the people voted for independence. The most recent one, when he was told not to talk about it anymore, was when Puigdemont, the president of Catalan, left the country and went to Germany, and Germans answered the EAW, a European arrest warrant. They held him, they were going to extradite him. Assange put something out there a couple of times, and there was big gatherings. The one that really pissed everybody off was he talked about the time when the Germans, in 1940, sent back to Franco the president of Catalan. And so that comparison really got the Germans pissed off, and pissed off Lenin, pissed off everybody. But he was also at that point, remember the Skripal thing was happening, that bullshit in Salisbury, and that phony sarin attack in Syria was happening. And he was now, he was talking about that. The other one was, I think, the deal on Catalan was the excuse, because Spain is so close to Ecuador, and that was the excuse. But it was really about the stuff he was talking about and going to talk about in terms of the sarin attack and the Skripal, the guy who is in better health than I am. I got to get a dose of whatever he has.
And I would also direct you, if you're curious about why Ecuador may have made this switch, a gentleman named Joe Emersberger has written good content about that online at Telesur, kind of explaining how Lenin Moreno emerged as a candidate who was seen as a great follower of Correa, but now he's kind of turned another way, and so he explains that a little bit more.
Ecuador's back in the U.S. military.
Yes.
You in the back, you here, and you with the graduation cap. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
My voice is loud now? Yeah,
I saw that you were attacked by a guy by name Alexander Reed Ross. He actually attacked me 2 years ago, and he constantly works with a group of people that actually deleted my Facebook account. This is before the Russiagate thing happened. I actually was cooperating with people that were tied with the Eurasianist movement, if you know what that is.
Yeah, I do know what it is.
Yeah, I was actually friends with Mark Sloboda, Peter Lavelle, a bunch of people working for RT. I was contacting them. And one of the things was that his ties with Political Research Associates and their history cooperating with the ADL and likelihood they're connected with this whole Russiagate thing, you know?
Okay, I got your question, and I'll quickly explain it to people whenever the other questions come.
Okay, who's next?
Quick question.
The whole thing with Trump and Russiagate, and at some point, they found out that Trump was really doing it, or Trump's allies, whatever, was doing it at the behest of Israel. And then that just disappeared. Did that really happen? Was that really true? And why has it disappeared? Nobody ever talks about Trump doing, Trump's people doing whatever he was doing in Russia at the behest of Israel.
Okay, graduation.
I appreciate the comments of the panelists. Specifically, I appreciate the attention to the fact that the biggest crime of the 2016 election was the rigging of the primary, and it was covered up by the Russiagate narrative in the media for most intense. But I wanted to ask specifically, in terms of an internal leak of the DNC emails, do the panelists have any comments on the case of Seth Rich?
There's no more that I want to talk about 9/11. I want to talk about Goldman 7 or Seth Rich today.
Right-wing sources likely Jennifer Rubin, right-wing journalist of the Fidesz.
Yeah, the question.
Right, we got 3 questions.
I'll be really quick. The question for me was just about a discredited journalistic fraud who had all of his work somehow that appeared at the Southern Poverty Law Center, a group I've worked with for several years, trying to link me to this kind of fascist international conspiracy. It was all completely deleted because it didn't pass editorial muster. And what the author tried to do was link me to the Duginist and Eurasianist movement, something I have no connection to, not too much familiarity with necessarily. I've never had any remote connection to it at all in my life, but it's part of their this emerging strategy of elements that I think are neoconservative in mentality and present themselves as left-wing to burrow within the left movement. And they're present at the Left Forum. There's going to be a panel on brown-red alliances. It's an elegant way of calling you a Nazi, but basically, I said in an interview that I think a multipolar world would be preferable to a unipolar world where you have U.S. hegemony. I think that's a basic anti-imperialist point of view. And what the Duginist movement does is they bond anti-imperialism with anti-liberalism. And it's not totally an ideology. It's not really an ideology I have any much familiarity with. But but they believe in a multipolar world too. So because I said multipolarism, I was immediately linked by this discredited author to what the movement you belong to.
Point to that he's tied with Political Research Associates, which has history cooperating with the ADL, and in the PRA they actually tagged Jill Stein and Norman Finkelstein.
We can get that afterwards, but I think there's pretty abundant evidence that this figure was working with actual neoconservative elements and pro-Israel elements like the ADL, which previously surveilled the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa and is now working to, I think, attack the anti-war movement. I would just say that Russiagate, one of the principal reasons that I oppose it and why I called it out from the beginning is that while it seems to be directed at Trump, it's going to go beyond Trump and it will be used to suppress the left as classic McCarthyism always did. And we can just look at this obscene attack on Ajamu Baraka, who is a black revolutionary, by some of the neoconservative elements that have burrowed within this conference. It's trying to link him to Donald Trump and genocide and everything, and it's that whole narrative that emerged from neoconservative circles and has been adopted by certain elements to shut down genuine principled revolutionaries and anti-imperialists. And I think the incident you point to is a classic case of that. We've got to move on. We've got to move on.
The question about Israel being the real source of, or at the real center of the Russiagate scandal. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, when Michael Flynn's messages were intercepted, the real power that he was trying to serve was Israel. It had to do with UN initiatives and all that kind of stuff. That may be what you're referring to. You referred to that obliquely before.
That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, that's all it was. But that was clear. It's very simple that Flynn was trying to do Israel's bidding. And the other just...
It was in the document.
Yeah, it's in his indictment.
Yeah, it's in the indictment.
Yeah.
That's the amazing thing about Rachel now. She loves to read this.
Right.
Yeah.
But she didn't read that.
And the irony, I mean, there's layers of irony, not just the fact that it was Israeli collusion within the Trump administration and not Russian collusion, but what they actually uncovered was the incoming U.S. administration trying to influence Russia, trying to tell the diplomatic staff of Russia not to vote or to block, to veto a resolution condemning Israeli illegal settlement activity. And I mean, it's the nerve of Flynn, right, to be on the phone with Russian diplomats and say, yeah, can you guys maybe veto this because we're going to come in and really try and resist. Like, of course Russia wasn't going to do that, but it shows...
Because Obama was still in power,
Right.
and Obama was going to abstain, so they needed Russia to veto
They
to
need-
protect Israel. That
Right.
was the whole thing.
But, I mean, not only did Flynn's indictment not prove Russian collusion, it also showed what the United States was trying to do, which was just absurd.
I'd like to say a word about Seth Rich. I know you...
Oh, I know, it's okay.
You've got enough conspiracies on your mind, man, but remember what I said before about Alan Dulles' conspiracy theory? Well, that's how they tried to discredit these facts. They're flat facts of what happened to Seth Rich. It's clear to our technical people, the NSA former technical directors, Bill Binney, Ed Loomis, and Kirk Wiebe, that there was no hack that got this information to WikiLeaks. There's other things that show that as well. So how did it get to WikiLeaks? Well, it's an extremely plausible explanation. As I understand it, this fellow, young fellow, was working for Bernie, and then he gets co-opted into working for Hillary, and he looks at these emails, and he's like, holy sh! Wow! Wow! Oh, this! Oh, look what they did here! This is primary. I gotta blow a whistle on this. Takes a thumb drive, copies stuff, not hacks or not even downloads. He copies it, all right, and he makes it available to Julian. Now, Julian doesn't reveal the sources, and I admire him for that. But he came damn near it, didn't he? When he said what happened to Seth Rich shows what dangers whistleblowers run. So, who's investigating with the laptop and all that stuff? Who's trying to get to the bottom of all of this? Anybody know?
CrowdStrike.
James Clapper.
The FBI. Now, I hope you guys know enough about the FBI to find out how ludicrous that is. Last thing I'll say on this is that in December, when Peter Strzok, I call him dumbstruck, FBI, assured Lisa Page, his paramour, look, we can text, nobody get these texts, we can text. Okay. Lisa said, are you sure? I'm second in the head at CIA, counterintelligence, for God, you relax. Well, we have those, okay? We got them in December. Now, Bob Perry was beginning to feel really bad, okay? He was beginning not to write. And, but on this one, he very rarely called me to compare notes, but maybe a handful of times over 10 years. This time he calls me, he says, Ray, have you read that? I said, yeah. He said, they're texts, right? I said, yeah. He says, you think the same thing I think about how this is turning now into Spygate, into FBI gate? I said, yeah, and then I was going to volunteer to write, but I knew that Bob wanted to write this one. That was his last piece, okay? And I picked up after that in early January and did a substantive piece on the same subject. But it was, just thinking back there, he thought this was the turning point, okay? Now, if you guys don't agree that it is a turning point, that all this damn Russiagate is a hoax, and that now we really have a threat from the deep state, a threat to our Constitution. You know, Constitution, well, you know, I carry it around with me because it's the only oath he ever swore, to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, Nunes, in my view, is trying to do a job. He thinks that an oversight committee is supposed to oversee things and not overlook things, okay? All right? Now, he's up against it, folks, and this is my plea to you. Mainstream media, the FBI, DOJ, for God's sake, at the very top, CIA, Brennan, NSA. Now, Rogers, you know, tries to Admiral Rogers has tried to protect his derriere, but he was in on it deep at the time. So what Nunes is facing is a self-interested cabal trying to stay out of prison, and they have all kinds of equities and tactics to employ, not the least of which is the mainstream media. So please tune in carefully and tell your friends that they can't find this out from the New York Times, that they got to look into Consortium News or listen to these guys here. And the last thing I just say is I applaud you for rescuing Randy out of obscurity and giving him, not only him, but Julian Assange and his mother and his brother and his sisters and his cousins and his aunts, and so do his sisters and his cousins and his aunts, his sisters and his cousins and his aunts.
All right, listen, we have 5 minutes left here. I want to say, yes, the Sethbridge, I don't know. I do think it was a leak. I do know it was a leak and it wasn't a hack, and especially the Podesta. But the Podesta thing was he's an idiot. Someone sends him an email saying, you got to change your password. So he changes it to password, all right?
Password one.
Anybody in the world, who falls for that? It's like falling for one of those Nigerian $50 million or pounds that they have waiting for you. That's what this idiot did, all right? He's a clown, and he fell for it. So anybody in this room could have done that to him. You may have been the leaker.
In defense of Podesta, he first asked a top cybersecurity official for the Clinton campaign if he should respond to the email, and they said you absolutely should.
Contractor, right?
Right.
Contractor.
Nice.
Maybe that guy was working.
He said it was the worst mistake of my life. I forgot to write the word "do not."
I responded to one of those $50 million offers from a Nigerian banker.
We all have.
And you won.
Well, you gotta go redistribute.
All right, so listen, we have quick questions that have quick answers. All right? Never mind.
It's Randy. It's Randy. It's all you.
Take charge.
What? All me? I'm gonna. It's quick. Wrap it up. One quick question. The gentleman in the back. All right, quick. No.
Are you assuming that Trump had no nefarious or illegal or questionable activities in Russia, forgetting about the election, but that in his dealings with what I read through the reports, Russian mafia people, money laundering, do you think that's all a lie?
I'll say I don't think that's a lie. All the collusion stuff. I think that all of these people, including Podesta, was involved in all of these banking scams or borrowing money or washing money. That's what they're going to get them on. Everybody. I don't know. Let him answer.
I just
so
want
we
to
got to
make
wrap it up.
a general statement about did Trump do this or that or the other thing. I've heard too many times from progressives, liberals, whatever, something that I used to hear from the cops when I was on the police beat. Yeah, we know he was innocent of this crime, but he deserved to die for the other 6 things, so we got him. He was a bad guy and he deserved to die. Whatever you think of Trump, it's you don't go after him for a phony operation that has been proven to be full of disinformation and outright lies.
And while there is reporting that shows Trump's connections with Russian oligarchs, there's also reporting that shows his dealings with Gulf oligarchs, Israeli oligarchs. I mean, it's a dirty, dirty world out there for our elites. I don't think his relationship to Russians was unique.
And why didn't they prosecute him 20 years ago for all these crimes?
Yeah, and why do we only ever hear the word oligarch to describe Russian capitalists?
Only Russians.
Well, and
are
also you can
oligarchs.
look at the crossover between like Viktor Vekselberg or Viktor Pinchuk, who are like, you know, oligarchs we're looking into. Pinchuk's actually Ukrainian. They were giving money to Trump, and they were giving money to the Clintons.
And they represent various interests. They're not all just one, and many of them don't support.
So part of Russiagate is elite, centrist, beltway, establishment reporters looking at the crisis of how capitalism has completely eroded democracy, and they're only allowed to talk about Russian oligarchs, and they can't talk about capitalism or campaign finance and Trump. But I mean, I mean, it's so far beyond Trump.
They
But
call it oligarch gate.
Right. All right, listen, that's going to, I think we have, I want to thank everybody for coming in today. If there's no line outside, people want to go to other panels, right? Is that, are people in between? I got to wrap it up because we, thank you. I want to thank, first of all, wait, let's give a thanks to Anya, Parapil, Blumenthal, McGovern,
call, and if you don't get to leave a message. Okay? You know what? Matter of fact, is that the easiest thing? Yeah, hold on. But I can't read what you did. Oh, I give you my phone. Yeah, but you know, when you give me, oh man, if you want to call, I'll call you. Yeah. I'll call you. This is my phone. Okay, just, okay, I'll take that. And if you want to call or what? All right. Nice to see you again. How's everything? Good, thank you. I'm actually recording for BAI. Good, good. This is fine. No, it's all right. You're still in LIU? I am, believe it or not, yeah. It's about one more year and you're still in I remember one time check this out. Years ago, there was a Klan rally